Hello curious fellow, here is the continuation of the video, Origin of War and Warfare. Before continuing our learning, if you didn't subscribe my channel, please press the subscribe button to get notification of all videos. Chapter 4. Organized Warfare. 4 warriors armed with bows and arrows attack a group of 3 archers. This scene can be found on a cave painting from Morella la Vella in northeastern Spain, which has been drawn a good 5,000 years ago. It is probably the oldest known representation of a fight between archers. Because of the positioning of the figures, some historians assume that it is the first depiction of a double envelopment, with the 4 archers on the left attacking the 3 on the right. Of course, this is far from evident, and one should not read too much into such illustrations. But taken together with other cave paintings dating roughly from the same time, it can be taken as the first actual indication of cooperation and tactics, and thus the 4th condition of our definition of war, organized action. One of these depictions shows 5 archers marching in a column behind a leader recognizable by his headdress, and another shows the execution of a person lying on the ground. According to military historian Arthur Ferriel, these scenes indicate that there was a leader and an orderly procedure, which is synonymous with the invention of tactics. By this, Ferriel primarily refers to the most basic components of tactics, namely a hierarchy, the column, and the line. Like most researchers, he assumes that tactics and strategy derived from hunting strategies, for example driven hunts, in which organized groups drove large animals into swamps or over cliffs. These hunting techniques were then transferred to the fight against members of the same species. The bow was one of 4 weapons that became widespread in the Epipaleolithic or Middle Stone Age, ca 20,000 10,000, 6,000 BC in Western Europe, and Neolithic 10,000 4,500 BC, 2,200 BC in Western Europe. The other 3 are the sling, the dagger, and the mace. Except for the mace, they were all used for hunting as well. The bow and arrow were the most important of these weapons. They drastically increased the range and efficiency of long-range weapons, completely changing the conditions of hunting and fighting. A well-thrown spear had an efficient range of no more than 25 meters, a spear thrower of up to 100 meters. But even a simple bow could shoot an arrow over 150 meters or more and was much simpler to handle. With it, one could attack an enemy or opponent without having to put oneself in immediate danger, carry many projectiles, and fight effectively in a group. While Stone Age warriors of Western Europe relied on bow and arrow, Near Eastern warriors preferred the sling. Archaeologists found large quantities of rounded stones and fired clay balls that were certainly intended as ammunition for this weapon. The sling was superior to the earliest bows in terms of range and penetrating power. It took years of training to use it effectively, but those who mastered it could be absolutely deadly on a distance of up to 180 meters with a maximum range of about 400 meters. The sling was used in primitive communities all over the world and was especially popular in the Mediterranean even into antiquity, most famously on the Balearic Islands. The most important Neolithic close combat weapons were spears, but maces, axes and adzes with blades and heads made of stone were also used. However, they were not nearly as important as the bow and the sling. These new and efficient weapons underline the increasing importance of armed conflict in the Stone Age. Combined with the evidence of tactics and the archaeological finds, they show that all 4 points of our definition were ticked in the Neolithic. Neolithic people waged war, and all too soon war took on increasingly terrifying forms. Chapter 5. An Age of War? When in 2015 a team of researchers studied the genetic diversity of our Stone Age ancestors, they noticed something strange. According to their data, about 5,000 years ago there was only 1 man per 17 women in Africa, Europe, and Asia. This became known as the Y chromosome bottleneck. Anthropologists and biologists were baffled. Had men almost been extinct? Soon it became clear that it was not the number of men that had declined so drastically, but merely their genetic diversity, which means that a small, interrelated group of men was reproducing with the bulk of the women. Nevertheless, this discovery puzzled biologists and anthropologists. In 2018, researchers at Stanford University found a plausible explanation. They suspect that the diversity of Y chromosomes has decreased due to cultural and social changes, that is, that the male gene pool has shrunk so much because patrilineal clans have repeatedly fought each other over generation. Because membership in these clans passed from father to son, and wars wiped out more and more of these male bloodlines, in the end only the men of a few clans actually reproduced with a majority of all women. This hypothesis fits with a number of hints that a burst of organized warfare occurred in the Neolithic. which Arthur Ferriel considers to be as drastic as Alexander's conquest of Persia in the 4th century BC or the march of Islam in the 7th century AD. The most important indication of this development is that between 8000 and 4000 BC, people increasingly began to fortify their settlements to protect themselves, their supplies and the infrastructure that was necessary for their new sedentary lifestyle. Fortifications are probably the most impressive and unambiguous trace of organized warfare in the New Stone Age. They clearly show the impact war had on humankind's way of life. One of the places that was fortified very early is Jericho. This settlement had a ditch, walls that were 3 meters thick and 4 meters high, as well as a massive 10 meters tower that was built around 8 feet 000 BC. These constructions probably enclosed the entire settlement with its approximately 2 feet 3,000 inhabitants. However, it is disputed whether it really was primarily a defensive structure. Some archaeologists suggest that the wall served as protection against seasonal floods. But even if that was the wall's main function, it was also an effective protection against attacks, because until heavy siege equipment and mines were invented, a simple wall gave the defenders a huge advantage. Similarly, the attackers of Catalhoyuk found nothing but smooth walls. This settlement, which at first glance looks like a densely packed group of houses, on closer inspection turns out to be well fortified. The site, which was built between 7500 and 6300 BC, was not protected by a free-standing wall, but by the fact that the houses in the outermost row were connected to each other, so that their outer walls formed a linked line of defense. These dwellings were accessible only by ladders from the roof, so that the outermost ring of houses even formed a kind of double wall. If attackers managed to break through the outer wall, they were trapped in one of the simply furnished housing spaces and exposed to the defenders on the roof. In similar settlements, for example in Hasseler Hoyuk and Umuktepe, the same system was even combined with an outer wall. Over the next few centuries, fortifications became common and improved rapidly. Around 5000 BC in Mesopotamia, the settlement of Tel Sawan was protected by a wall with a foundation, and another 500 years later, Yangalik, a city on the Trans-Caspian Plateau, had a wall with round towers that were no longer inside the wall but outside it. This was a milestone for defensive installations, because in case of an attack, it was possible to shoot along the wall at an attacker's flank. Epilogue: in 1991, a mummified body was found in Tyrol. It soon became known as Otzi due to an article in a Viennese newspaper, which named him after the Ötztal Alps where his body was found. About 50 years ago, an arrow pierced his shoulder blade and a violent blow, possibly from a fall, crushed his skull. The exact circumstances of his death are still debated today. While some initially claimed to have found blood on his equipment, the Institute for Mummy Studies at Arouca Research Center in Bonds did not detect any human blood on either the dagger or the arrows he was carrying. However, the arrow wound in his shoulder, the cuts on his hand and arm, and scratch marks all over his body indicate that he was involved in a fight shortly before his death. Otzi is possibly the best known victim of early warfare and as such stands for the fact that organized warfare existed in the Neolithic period. It might not be possible to determine whether it is in human nature to wage war or whether it is a learned behavior, but from the Neolithic period onwards it certainly has been a crucial part of the human existence and has had a decisive influence on the development of human culture. It was not long before humans resorted to even more effective weapons, used more complicated tactics, and built stronger defenses. Fortified cities would soon become city-states and eventually the first great empires would emerge. Cities and empires escalated war to a new dimension in the Bronze Age and henceforth war unlike any other force would decisively shape humanity in the course of history, but this is a topic for a future video. I hope you enjoyed this information. Please comment what you learn in this and please subscribe to my channel, it will immensely help. Thanks for watching.